Hello everyone, exciting podcast today. We have some people from JuVie Productions, which is the production company that Viola Davis and Julius Tenen started. So if you don't know who Viola Davis is, she is a very popular and talented actress from The Help, from How to Get Away with Murder. How to Get Away with Murder has just, oh my gosh, blown up. Everyone loves it. It's such a great TV show. And her husband, Julius, is also an actor and a producer. And so they are the head of JuVie Productions, which is an artist-driven, LA-based production company that develops and produces independent film, television, theater, VR, and digital content across all spaces of narrative entertainment. And the two people we are chatting with today is Josh, who is the head of immersive and interactive media at JuVie, and also Rob, who is the Senior VP of Theatrical Motion Pictures, Development, and Production here at JuVie Productions. So great convo, great convo about, mainstream entertainment here in LA. And I think it'll serve a lot of value to you listeners out there trying to live your best creative life. And it's just a great behind the scenes of a world that I think we're all very curious about. And these two guys are epic. They were so generous with their time and their advice. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for being on That Creative Life, guys. It's so exciting to have you.
Thank you for having us.
And so Josh and Rob, I want to get into your life, but let's start out with JuVie Productions. Tell me a little bit of background, the stories you guys tell. And then obviously I love this picture, this work of art we have behind us of Viola Davis.
Yeah.
So obviously, Viola Davis, Julius Tenen are at the helm of JuVie. But yeah, give us a little background. What are the stories you guys tell?
Should you start?
Well, it's the mission is to be a voice for the voiceless and to tell stories with authentic characters that we don't typically get to see represented or portrayed. It started initially as an opportunity for Viola to find and cultivate and produce those roles that she was capable of, but frankly aren't available enough. And since her success, the company has been the mission has been to pay that forward. Yeah,
absolutely.
Love that. And what are some of the current projects that you have out? I want to let the people know. What do you guys have brewing? But is there stuff out there right now that they can watch? They can see what you're all about.
Well, that's actually the interesting thing about JuVie is Viola's provided a platform for us to build out the content. So the last few years, we've been focused on that. And we've been successful in establishing a slate of content that is right on brand. And so the next few years is going to be execution of that.
Love it.
And so.
And what different mediums? Because you're everywhere, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have television, which is through an deal with ABC. And through the television deal, we did a few projects there. One called Two Sides, which is still running. Last Defense would still be on ABC. You'll probably find it on abc.com.
Awesome.
And Last Defense, that was a TV1 project. And I'm sure you can locate that through their website. On the film side, in December we just closed a deal with Amazon Studios.
Congrats!
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you very much. And we're really excited about that because they work in so many different mediums, and it's and their structure parallels our objective in the content that we've been developing and preparing for distribution.
Love it. So obviously we'll get more into JuVie, but let's start with Rob.
Ooh.
So I did my research. Okay. So Rob, you've worked at studios like Paramount, DreamWorks, Disney, ABC to develop work. But you've also had many roles, from like a screenplay editor to production supervisor, and then, an executive. So I want to kind of like take me back to the first 5-10 years of your career, and what what were you doing then? And what was that like? You know, I'm sure out here in LA, it's a journey to become, to get to that certain level where you're the honcho making the decisions. But bring me back to the beginning. What were you doing? What were some of the projects you were working on?
Oh, well, at the risk of aging myself, I came into the business from the banking industry. I was, I was operations manager at City National Bank here. And what was interesting about my trajectory is I never intended, one, to ever live in California. And two, I guess it was always there, the idea of entertainment, because I took some film classes in college, but it was coming from the South, from Louisiana, it's never a thing that is a real job. And so I was focused on being in the finance industry. So my goal was to move to New York. And that's all I was thinking about. I was focused on New York. And I've always been a little bit of a high achiever. So I finished high school at 16. And forgive me, I finished high school, went to college at 16.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I can't imagine that.
Right. And so it's, always been on the sort of an advanced track, right? And through a series of events, I ended up coming to California and fell in love with it. Moved here not knowing nearly anyone. And through a series of events, I ran into Eddie Murphy and his team, who I had known. And after getting familiar with the idea that he had a deal at Paramount, I asked, okay, will you hire me? Because I like what you guys are doing. At first, I was resistant because I was so used to just...
Were you still working at a bank during this time?
I'm still working at a bank. Not only was I working at the bank, I had 3 jobs. I was working at the bank.
People talk about hustling.
Yeah,
I mean, that
hustling.
is like having some side hustle. What were your other 3 jobs?
This is really going to date me. I had a job at a fax manufacturing company.
Wow. What is a fax?
So I had a job at a fax manufacturing company that I went to from like 8 to 5. From 6 to 9, I went to, I had a job at the Beverly Center. And then from 10 to 4, I had a job at the bank.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
And, it was just instilled to me from forever, right? Because my parents did it, right? It was all about working. Yeah. And being here on my own, I had to make a way. So I just had to work to make money and survive, because it was sort of a culture shock to go from the South, where, everything is cheaper, to here, where, it's multiples. Yes. So that is what drove, all the work at that point. But then I made the transition into being a production assistant for Eddie Murphy. So going from where I was to making $7.50 an hour was a shock to everything that I had known. Right. But I was inspired by what they were doing, and so I took the job. And at the time, his office were on the Paramount lot. But being the guy that I am, I've always dove into learning and figuring things out. Right. I was a little bit resistant to be a production assistant at that point, because I thought I was, more advanced than that. Yeah. But they convinced me, okay, you don't know much about the business, so take this now, and we'll take care of you later. They then end up developing a TV show with Red Fox and Lorenz Tate. Back then, this must have been 1989, maybe.
Nice. When were you born? Because you look young.
I was born after that.
Thank you, Josh.
I'm sorry, Rob. I'm sorry, Rob.
Thank you, Josh.
Oh my gosh.
So I did that, right, and ended up learning a lot, because I transitioned from being a production assistant for his company to being a production assistant on the TV show.
So you're in the middle of the action.
I'm in the middle of action. So now we're doing this TV show for Paramount, and you know, I had a little bit of a cachet because I was connected to him during that time, but still had that same work ethic, and came to the attention of the line producer at the time, and he asked, "Hey, after this, I have another job. If you want to come work with me," and I was like, "Sure," you know, because. You know, what I realized is that with my ambition, I had to find opportunities for myself, and he was offering one. So I took that job, and unbeknownst to me, it ended up being for the Roseanne show.
Wow, that's amazing.
Right?
Wow,
but
with that stuff lately.
Right?
It's a lot.
The great thing about that experience is it was with Carsey Warner, who was at the time one of the sort of premier independent TV production companies. They were doing A Different World, The Cosby Show, Roseanne, and a number of shows after that. But acting as an independent, they had their own sort of business affairs, legal, production departments, and they were very generous about sharing their time about who does what. And so I took advantage of that, sitting down with some of the executives periodically to say, okay, how does this work? How does that work? And I learned a tremendous amount. At the same time, Eddie Murphy had another TV show that he was greenlighting that I was very familiar with being developed while I was there. And they offered me to come back and work on that. And I took that job. And that job actually led to me working for Paramount proper.
So with that one, were you still a production assistant?
I was still a production assistant.
Wow.
Yeah, I was still a production assistant.
Yeah.
But this was the interesting transition in that now I'm feeling like I'm a little bit more than a production assistant because I've been a production assistant for, it had been a couple of years. And I was actually looking to advance into a next role, which was actually in my idea was as a writer, because I had been, training myself to write, and that didn't come through. But because I was now familiar with the studio, they offered me a job which was transitioning this production department from almost non-existent into a full-on production department. I took that job instead of the writer thing, right? 10 years later, I'm a production exec at Paramount, working as sort of a liaison between the studio and all the network TV shows.
Wow. That's amazing. And what I get out of that is a lot of people's ego will probably get in the way of accepting that production assistant job. And so for you to even be like, oh, well, I know Eddie Murphy, I need something fancier than a production assistant job. But it ultimately led to where you are now,
exactly.
Which I think is so powerful. And what I've learned in this industry is you just got to get in the room.
You just got to get in the room, and be get in the room, do the work, and be mindful of the relationships, because the relationships weren't something I was seeking. It was information.
Right.
And it was having the information that justified me being there.
Right.
Because one of the things I always say to people is, when we meet, when we come into interaction, you may not know me, like me, connect with me, but does the information make sense? So am I offering information, answers, solutions to a situation that is supportive? If that's the case, then evaluate that for what it is.
Definitely.
Right? And then within that, you can determine my value.
Yeah.
Right. Not based upon what I look like or where I come from, or any sort of, and this is one of the things that sort of drives JuVee, right? It's not about the social constructs. It's about seeing people as individuals and how an equation can come together for the good.
That's powerful. So Josh, what was your Eddie Murphy moment?
Oh man, I don't know if I can compete with that.
So you went to school though, right? You did the whole college thing.
That's right.
And did you go to school in Seattle?
I actually went to a school called Biola in Southern California and studied film.
Okay. Okay, amazing. And when I was looking you up, you had a lot of stuff that was not only just what you're doing now, but you were writing and you were acting, right?
That's right.
And so my biggest question is, where did the time for like the technology come in? Was that something that you were always interested in, or how did that integrate into your life and to your art?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been so fascinated with technology. My parents say my dad used to have like a cop radar scanner in the car, and they would turn it on, and it would like buzz up, and I would like freak out as a kid, just delight. And I've always loved technology, especially as it intertwines with storytelling or the connectedness of that art is able to do to let someone know that they're not alone in their experience, that they're not alone. Whether it's music or film, I love learning about animation techniques that were developed by Disney, or any of these advancements and how they're integrated, how the technology inspires the storytelling and vice versa.
How many Pixar documentaries have you watched?
Not enough. But I have. I've seen some. So I grew up in the Seattle area, Egyptian American. In 4th grade, I built my first computer, and it was...
I didn't know that.
Well, there was a class. I mean, it wasn't like, you know...
In 4th grade, you had a computer building class?
It was, right? It's actually not... It
so
was
what
like
elementary
Legos.
school did you go to?
And I had this vision of his parents going, "Josh, what are you doing in there? Building a computer?"
Leave me alone. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, always been fascinated with technology and with story and with character. And I remember in middle school falling in love with, they were called QuickTime VRs, which were these still photos that people were stitching together with programs like Huggin. And it was basically really early VR 360 photos before there was even headsets to look at them on. And I remember at that time thinking, like, how cool would it be to have that in
was
video,
so ahead
if you
of
could
its time.
yeah. There was one I used to look at it all the time. It was these beautiful panoramic scans of Angkor Wat, these beautiful temples and these photos all over Asia. But there was something really cool about being able to be immersed in these worlds before, even before you could put yourself in them with a headset. But I fell in love with film really early on as well. Would always be making videos and getting friends together I had 3 sisters, so they were constant, crew and cast to direct and things. Yeah. And I got my first, my first industry job in Seattle. There was a production company called Costa Productions, and I was just the studio intern. I shouldn't say just, because
you probably did more than getting coffee. Yeah. I mean, they put you to work, right?
I cleaned a lot of toilets. Yeah.
Did you really clean toilets?
Oh my goodness,
As that's like what people what?
Oh yeah,
interns
I've cleaned a lot.
Toilets?
Oh my goodness, I've cleaned. I won't even say I've cleaned for.
Does he clean toilets here sometimes? Do you make homework?
No.
Yeah, but yeah, I cleaned chicken coops. Wow.
Chicken coops.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've got stories.
Wow.
But I moved on I got to PA. Eventually, when I came down here, I got to PA on a lot of commercials. Ended up getting to work on features as a production assistant to clean more trailer toilets. And there's a lot of toilet cleaning.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I think the idea behind that is that you do what you have to do to get, to make the environment better.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so we did a panel, guys, at Sundance, and it was really, really cool to chat with you guys there. But with everything you said, I was like, I want to talk to them more about that. So I'm really glad we're getting this chance. But
good.
At the panel, you actually mentioned, so a girl came up and asked you about, she does more of the internet thing, and she was like, how do I get plugged in? How do I get in this like mainstream industry? And you had a very interesting answer, and that you said, I mean, I wasn't even aware of this, that the studios have training programs. Can you expand on that? And like, what does that look like? Does everyone have them? How do you get involved?
Okay. Not everyone has them, but they are quite popular. Like JuVee has an internship program, and oftentimes we find those through the universities, but we also, are open to talking to people to determine, okay, is there some value what we do can add to your objective? And based on that, right, based on your objective, is there some value that you can add to what we do, right? So can we learn from each other? And so outside of the university system, we'll sort of look at maybe working with interns in that way. But the studios, I don't know if Amazon has one, but that would be something to research. And most of the time it's just a matter of identifying who the studios are and then going onto their website and seeing if they have some of them have internship programs, some of them have specific programs for writers, directors, or talent that wants to jump in. I don't know that any of them operate in the actor space, but behind the scenes, most of them have a program, internship program, or not. I think it's a little bit more than just an internship program. That's some of them offer, because that's separate from the training programs that they have in terms of writers, directors. Some of them have editing programs. And so we really just be a matter of going onto Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, all those websites to see what they offer.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So how did you get plugged into, because you graduated from school, right? And so was it just those internships, those side jobs that kind of got you your start? And then I'm always, I love the discussion of college, especially when it comes to the arts.
Yeah.
And what value do you get out of it for the amount of money you pay? Was it mainly the relationships that you got out of the experience? Was it mainly the teachers? Because just for some background, so I went to college for 3.5 years for electrical engineering, computer science, and now I'm a YouTuber. But so I had a lot of college while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And very later on, I figured out it was not electrical engineering. But I dropped out and, pursued the video thing. And I just see a lot of people who are spending a lot of money on something that maybe isn't delivering the amount of value that they think it is. So I want to hear about your college experience and what, was it amazing? Was it okay? Was it worth it? Did you learn a lot?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to evaluate what your own expectations are of college. I don't think, especially in this industry, for even people who are that we're looking to partner with, I'm not looking at pedigree or where you graduated from. I'm looking at your work. I'm looking at your reel. I'm looking at what you've produced. And from that perspective, I think it's easy to get tied up in. There is something to be said for name and recognition, right? As kind of vetting systems. So I think there is something to be said if someone's gone to a USC or NYU. However, I think at the end of the day, I'm looking at the work, and if you go into college with that if you're going into film school with that understanding, I think it's certainly the relationships are crucial. But I think you get out of it whatever you put in. So from some people's perspectives, I might have been a bad student because I was so focused on getting, getting things off the ground. Right. But I have to say, my experience was incredible because I had an incredible community that I got to be a part of, and the administration would fight for me when I would push for things. So we were the first. I got to be a part of the first student-initiated feature film. But we weren't just, it wasn't just kind of like a run and gun thing. We went out, and I was forced to get the experience of putting together a business plan. We set up an LLC. We offered securities. We went and got investors and working with LA rental houses, getting talent and crew from LA, and all of that process is just being, I kind of got freaked out during my time. I realized that I was in short film school and not in film school. And after working on a feature film, like a real feature film, and you see all these systems that you learn in production management in place, and you see that it's attainable. People do this. There are systems in place that, and without being exposed to that machine, I think it's really hard to wrap your head around, these different protocols are there for a reason. And I think it's finding a balance of like being nimble and intuitive and an entrepreneur at the same time, understanding that there's a reason, there's a day out of days, and there's a reason for call sheets. There's a reason for script breakdowns, and you don't need film school to learn all of those things. And in fact, I think a lot of people would argue that you don't really get to learn those things until you're just thrown into the midst of it. But where film school can be an advantage, it's a safe place to fail really well.
So you have to put your whole self into it. You can't half-ass film school, or it won't be worth it, pretty much.
But it's also, it depends on what you're wanting to do. It's an opportunity to learn if you're I think depending on what you're trying to do, I think everyone comes in expecting, I want to be a director, I want to be an auteur, and you might learn that actually
auteur? Wait, what's
an
that?
auteur.
Is that like a fancy for artists?
Yeah.
I think we're learning so much, guys.
I think it's author, like in French, and it comes. I think it comes from like the French New Wave cinema. This idea that that the frame is your pen as an author, and so you're
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm inspired.
Yeah.
Yeah, they probably come in and I'm going to be the next David Fincher, and that's the idea. So with the immersive stuff and the interactive stuff, was that something that you were completely doing on the side, or did you learn that in school?
No, that really didn't exist while I was in school.
I know, because I was about to say, I'm like, I don't think you're sitting there learning about VR and
no.
So all of that was on your own?
Yeah, and I think that's the posture of life. I think anyone in production needs to adopt, is the adaptability. So you should be able to jump in any, like, learn the systems, understand what walkie protocol is if you're on set as a set PA, or learn what the filing systems are if you're an office PA and coding. And I think that's the thing, is being able to be a self-starter. I had a friend, I worked on a feature with a friend who, she was an assistant. I was assisting another producer. She was assisting the other producer, and she ended up getting into VR. And I heard through the grapevine about some of the things she was doing, and I saw some stuff at Sundance. I was like, I need to get into this. This is so cool. And reminiscent of the immersive 360 photos of Angkor Wat that I'd seen. And eventually I had asked, and another really cool thing about like the set life, I think there's so many different ways to enter into this industry. It didn't even occur to me that there might be an opportunity to rise through like agencies, for instance. UTA has like the UTA job list. There's different job postings. There's Facebook groups. And where I had found success is like when I would try to make things or try to do things, just like researching as much as I could out of it, and then asking anyone who would be willing for even just like, can I have a 5-minute phone call with you? I remember for a while I was convinced I wanted to be a DP. So I was shooting a lot of shorts, and I'm researching cameras, and I would just reach out to gaffers, to DPs of anything that I thought was good, and just say, hey, I'm working on this short. Can you give me 5 minutes? I want to ask you how you compose this one shot, or what lights you use, or just like, that deep dive. And I was so surprised how many people would give their time. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And so how long was the period of you being VR? That's cool. I want to learn more. I mean, obviously you've always been interested in it, but how long did it take you to really soak it all in, put it into practice, and now you have a job, you know?
I'm still learning it.
Yeah.
I think everyone is still learning it. There's
no one
tried
really,
true.
has.
But that's the exciting part, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's evolved so much. Even since I started, it's evolved. The landscape is completely different. The players, the kind of content that's being made, the tools, all of that.
People are watching it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, an interesting thing that I've experienced just as a content creator, and how people are using 360 now. So my highest viewed video on YouTube is actually a 360 video of me skydiving.
Oh wow!
No way.
So when Samsung put out their 360 camera, they got like 10 creators to go and make like crazy videos, and we premiered it at VidCon. And when they released what was the first version of the Samsung goggles? I forgot what they're called.
Gear VR?
Yeah, just the Gear VR.
Yeah.
That was kind of the first mainstream, everyone was getting it for Christmas. And I remember there was a 2 million view spike.
Wow.
On the 25th and 26th of December, like two or 3 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
Where everyone was getting a Gear VR for Christmas. And my video was one of the first that was loaded up in like the Samsung store. But it's very interesting to see that. I thought, oh, this is the future, right? This is so cool. 360 cameras. But there's still that aspect of, I don't want to say gimmicky, but people still don't know how to interact with it.
Right.
And now it's interesting to see 360 cameras capturing everything, and then you as the editor get to decide what to put in and manipulating it from that, like with the Insta360 and like all those cameras. And so can you... I am so interested in this. We'll get to you in a second. But can you kind of explain the technology shift from your perspective? Because it's one thing for me as a solo creator, right, to see the tools change and how people watch on YouTube. But I think it's a completely different story when you're talking about the big screen, or you're talking about just these different mediums that you guys are exploring. Can you briefly chat about that? This might be a 2-hour conversation, but I'm so interested in the medium, you know?
Well, so the shift for me happened while I was working on a film, and at that time I had an incredible mentor named Sam Houseman who's worked on fantastic films, and I'd worked on several features with her at this point. And a common AD that we worked on a film together brought me on this other film to help out with, and I met this actor named Beth Grant, who was talking about this project that she was working on, and she was looking for a producer. Her daughter, Mary Chieffo, who plays Laurel on Star Trek Discovery, and is a total badass, brought me over, and I just presented like some of the materials that I've put together for other things that I've produced, and presented the budgets and the business plans and the proposals, all that stuff. And we talked about it, and they were describing something that needed to be VR. And this is the first time that someone is like, we're, pitching a project, we're talking about it. I'm like, this should be VR. But I was nervous even to suggest it, because I thought it might even be offensive to be like,
stop what you're doing.
Yeah. Right? VR. Because even then it kind of feels like stigmatized, or there's like this part of like, it's like kind of a less than thing, or it's like, they were originally thinking of a web series, and I was like hesitant to offend them by saying, but I was waiting for my Uber, and I remember my Uber was, it kept like missing the street or whatever, and it was late. And so after like waiting for 5 minutes, I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'll ever see these people again. I just said, have you thought about VR? And then they're like, no. And that snowballed into this entire crazy adventure. And so I'd done a little bit of research at that point, but at that point it was like, okay, well now if I'm going to be producing VR, I need to know everything about it. I need to know all the players. And I went out.
So from that point, were they like, yep, it's your project, like go for it?
Well, no, so it was a collaboration, right? So it was really me servicing their vision, and we're packaging and putting the elements together. And they actually had it as a web series here at JuVee. And
cool.
And so they presented the idea to Julius as, what if this is, what if we did VR? And then it turns out that there's already an appetite, and like Viola's using VR in her trailer to, it's like a therapeutic escape. And so they're like into it, which is awesome.
That's cool.
And so from that moment on, it was like, well, this is my focus now. Understood this, like just got into the space. And then every project that I was working on, I was still doing lots of freelance. I had built a lot of relationships from people that I worked with on films with Netflix and different, like BuzzFeed videos, all these different contacts that I had. But now when they're asking me to come on either as, like to line produce or to coordinate or to whatever, I said, that's fine, I'm going to do that. But will you let me can I produce a 360 behind the scenes video at the same time?
Cool.
And so I was building my reel that way. So everything I'm working on, I'm understanding how to edit it through, and I'm still getting my paycheck for, showing up and doing production work.
That's cool.
And then built relations through that way, because I'd meet people who are like, oh, you're using, they'd see my Samsung 360, like, you're doing VR? Well, I'm working on this other VR thing. We need somebody.
Cool. That's cool. Is that what you were using? What was your
at that
gear
time?
when you
Yeah.
were shooting?
Yeah. It was just like Samsung 360. And then I would deliver it to the producers and be like, here's your behind the scenes. You can do whatever you want. You can like upload it or not. And then, and then I started getting calls for that. And then started helping consulting, ended up getting to work on a PlayStation 4 VR video game, like a PSVR video game. And that all helped inform, just understanding the space, going through like the Oculus Rift libraries, the Gear VR libraries, the Google Cardboard, just watching everything and reaching out to everyone I could to just sit down and figure out like, okay, how'd you make this?
And it's cool. Yeah. It's cool to be living in a time where there's still new things, arriving, and it's just the beginning. And I think for people who want to get into this and, you have to be unique, right? I think there's so many opportunities for these new spaces to be unique because there's not as many people in them, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, and that's a part of that's one of the really cool things about this company is we're looking to, we're simultaneously, we're telling stories, and we're also looking for opportunities to empower emerging talent and powerful storytellers who haven't been given those opportunities to tell their stories. Right. And when you have in new media, there's a lot of these opportunities, right? Because if it's just good and it stands out, right, a bigger fish in a smaller pond, so to speak. And that's a part of our strategy of looking at. We've got these huge, big studio IPs that we're developing. Then we also have these original projects. And they go hand in hand. But yeah, it was beautiful. As a team, as a department, we're learning this space together with Beth, with Mary, with Kaylin, with Julius, myself. We're taking all these meetings, and figuring out what it means to package and to put together. How do you tell a story well in this space? And then one of our earliest advisors was Connor Doyle from Harvard, who's doing the VR department there. It was this long journey of just really figuring out this space and going to the conventions and
doing all the things.
But so we went from, that was originally a 360 video, this project, and it ended up being something that's done completely in Game Engine. So you can move through it, and we did like volumetric capture. We captured 9 people simultaneously, and it's like this wall of cameras that you reconstruct these meshes and these textures. Cameras? It was well over 50. I can't remember the exact count, but
oof.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, and that's a cool thing because when you're on those shoots, or maybe you have a PA job and you're like, why am I here? There's a lot of opportunities to be like, hey, I'm going to make a 360 behind the scenes, and then you can become that 360 guy or gal, and going back to like your history in banking, Rob, I think a lot of your past really informs, the future and what you do without even thinking about it. I thought I wasted 3 years of my life like coding, but in hindsight, it really has affected me as a human today and like my interest in tech and everything. And so how did that really inform what you're doing now or what you were doing at Paramount? And the movie industry, it works on numbers, right?
Yeah.
That's a very important part of projects.
Yeah. What I found really fascinating is that all those parts work collectively together, because in finance, this was interesting because my job at the bank was I was in charge of money availability, which essentially follows the process of your deposits into the bank and the bank's deposits into the Federal Reserve. And so it required an element of creativity because it's determining what's going to make the most money for the bank, because the bank is depositing into the Federal Reserve to match interest rates because those change. In looking at creating content, right, it's a lot of numbers, right? It's 1, right, a story, plus 2, an actor, plus 3, a director, right, plus a distributor. So you have to go back and look at, okay, what's the equation I need to get this out to the audiences that need to see it? And so it really is once you've done that, you look at who cares, right? So then you go back to look at the audience. What are the numbers there? So if the audience is not there, do I spend this much to make it? Right, so it then becomes, so that creative game then tracks back to the numbers game. So it all kind of works hand in hand.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can you talk through, we talked a little bit about this on the panel, but the creative process of how you guys find projects and from the moment of having an idea to working, it says on your website that JuVee is an artist-driven production company, which is cool, but what does that mean for, we'll get to the creative process, but what does that mean, artist driven production company, with who you work with?
At the basis of it is that Viola and Julius are both artists. Mm-hmm. And so the attraction to developing content is to people who have really creative minds. If someone walked in and said, hey, I've got something I can do for this number, and I can make this number on it, and and I just need your name, it's not a JuVee thing. But if someone says, hey, I have an idea and I think that it can, change the conversation and people will really feel inspired by hearing this story, or we can, distribute this in this community and make a difference, then that's something that's more attracted to as a JuVee project.
Awesome. Yeah. And so once you find those stories, what's the process? Because is it theater? Is it VR? Is it a TV? Is it film? How do you categorize ideas? How do you figure out where they live? How do you figure out how many people are working on that project?
It's one of the elements of our process is to determine where best might this project be received, right? So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll look at say a film that comes in, and we'll say, okay, is there a moment within this story that we can tell that would be well served by having an immersive experience, right? So if a character is going through some dramatic situation and we feel like it could create a better element of empathy for the characters, then what we try to do is work with Josh to explore how that can happen. And so what we do in-house is just kind of look at, okay, is this a better film? Is this a better TV? Or should it just exist on an immersive content platform? And once we determine that, the proper department will take over. But
even before that, does the story move us? Are the characters people that we relate to that we haven't typically seen before? I think there's so much, and just because you can doesn't mean you should. And it's easy to take on more than what your bandwidth allows. And I think it's really helpful to have a community of artists to bounce ideas with and to go through submissions with, and also just looking at our slate and what's being said through this project, what's being communicated. And then, like Rob's saying, finding the right audience, the right place, the right because, and then there's all these subcategories. So if it's a film, then at what level, what kind of budget, what kind of, is it a straight to platform?
Yeah, what do you guys think of the age of content right now? Because it seems kind of like the Wild West, which is cool because there's so many opportunities for different kind of creators, different kinds of production companies. It's not just TV, film, it's Netflix, Hulu, TV, like all of these things, right? And so is this an exciting time? Is it, how would you describe the time we're living in for creators? And
one of the best times in the history of content creation. One of the things that I noticed is when you mentioned that you're a content creator, you sort of air quoted, and I was curious to know why you did that.
It's kind of all encompassing, because I'll say YouTuber. I'm not ashamed to be a YouTuber, but at the core of it, I just tell stories,
right?
And whether it's telling from behind the camera, because I started doing a lot of documentary series stuff before I even became an on-camera personality. And so I think it's a way to like not put me so much in a box, because I think when people hear YouTuber, it's, oh, she like sits in front of a camera and talks about drama. No, it's so much more than that,
And we firmly believe in that. It was putting the air quotes around it. Because you are a content provider, and so there's no
No bunny ears.
There's no there's no bunny ears to it, and that's kind of how we approach content, right? We look at, is this an interesting subject? Is this something that we haven't seen before, right? Is this going to offer new information to the world that they may not have considered before? And now that we agree that that is the case, where is this better suited for a platform?
Right.
And so that's part of the process, is looking at it as content, right? And because there's so many different avenues for distribution, that's what makes it so much better, is because, we don't have to say, okay, there's no studio going to buy this. There's no TV network going to air this. We can determine, is this interesting enough? And can we mount it as a TV show or a series because it is interesting enough? And then we determine, okay, where is it best placed?
Right.
Yeah.
Is being in LA, knowing the people that you know and who you work with, is that a similar feeling across the industry? Because sometimes it feels like I am just very removed from everything that's going on here. Of course, I'm on the East Coast, but also a part of this whole, internet thing that sometimes feels very separate. It almost feels like me versus them, or them versus me kind of feeling. Throughout the years, I've been able to form a lot of amazing relationships. It doesn't feel as much like that. But I don't have as good of a pulse on the LA industry, the mainstream industry. Is that a similar feeling that people feel? Is there a little bit of romanticization? Is that a word? I don't know if that's a word, of how times used to be in Hollywood. What is kind of like the pulse on what people are feeling in the industry?
I would offer that the primary pulse is that there's one degree of separation between any medium. And it's really the perspective of the person on the other side of the table. Because if people are smart, they're looking at identifying content wherever it is. But, there are some people who are romanticizing what it used to be, and they're just in their lanes. I think that has a tendency to catch up with you.
Yeah. And, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think it's interesting for me because I'm straddling some different worlds with my department. The VR community is a really cool one, and everyone is still, it's like we're all in this together. And it's interesting for the overlap of those who are, there's a lot of VFX houses, there's a lot of people who are still kind of like, in the traditional Hollywood mainstream world, but also in this other, like, and you get these, they kind of feel like high school reunions when you go to like the Oculus Connect conferences, or you go to, different VR summits, or VR on the lot, or whatever it is.
What is VR on the lot?
There's so this year there is at Paramount. There's also at the Meta Stage. It's a group of it's like a big industry event where you have a lot of different studios, different creators, different directors in the space talking about what they're doing in VR. That's cool. I think what's difficult about the platforms that are available for the VR AR space, or I guess the XR space, is you might have you have an IP and you're trying to develop it to a particular platform, and that each platform can be very different from one another. So if you're developing something for VR, that might be very different than mobile AR, or very different than head-mounted AR. And so when you're packaging or pitching something and shaping it to the best experience that it can be, it's almost like a new project for each deck that you're developing as a pitch. And it's a new project, and really trying to weigh what the experience is. And that's even just not even taking into account the just the business model for each of these different streams. So you have to find people who are in it and are willing to really think this through and figure this out, and understand, is it an LBE, like a location-based entertainment VR experience like The Void or a Dreamscape, or is this something that's more an at-home VR? Is it a big enough IP to drive the sales, or is it something, like there's all these different conversations, and I think that it can be exhausting to have so many different places to go and different ways to shape things, but it's also really encouraging, because if they weren't as many different places to go, then it would be a lot harder to get content
There's not
sold.
just one way to do it, and that's exciting, but also overwhelming at the same time. which I think is cool though.
Yeah, you have to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I would tend to offer that the entire industry is similar, right? Because in making film or making television, there's so many different ways to enter the storytelling process that and the market is so competitive now that you could make a TV that a film that goes straight to Netflix platform or Amazon platform, or you can make one that goes into the theaters. And so you really have to curate it for the intention. And I think that is really what makes a difference, because there's a bit of a narrative that it's all digital, and it's not necessarily the case, right? Because people are still going to the theaters. People are still watching television, and people are finding their content on through streaming. So there's space, and I may have mentioned this before, right? I think the environment is big enough to support each medium. It's just now shared. But really depends on how the content is curated as to where it's best to have the experience.
Right.
Yeah, and it puts it on us to figure out how to innovate and to adapt to the system.
Exactly.
And that's a lot. We spend a lot of time thinking about what are ways that we can recoup, because if we're working with in the new media space, where are we going to get what can we do to offset the loss of residuals or other
What does that mean?
So well, maybe Rob, you can.
So one of the ways that the market has changed in that, it used to be just a studio system, right? And as a creative, you would go make a deal with the studio, and based upon the success of that, the upside, you would realize, the residual. So the residual will be the income that you receive from the success of whatever the content is. Well, now that there's, the OTT is involved, and there's less of a life in the marketplace to the content, because it's available for free or by subscription.
Gotcha.
And so the residuals are limited to the creators. And so what the creators have begun to do, like we're doing, is look for opportunities for other income streams.
When it comes to the IP, because you keep saying IP, and that's something that I'm pretty foreign with the idea, but at the same time, it's creating something special that's yours, right? And seeing how long of a life can it have? It's not just TV series, but as you're saying, it could be a video game. It could be X, Y, and Z. And so is that how people are looking at all of these things now, in terms of, like, what does that look like? If it's a TV series, what's the next thing that you're thinking about? Are you thinking each of these projects are going to have a life of like 10 years? Or like what's the scope? Because I find that very interesting, like a way to look at it.
Per project, right? I mean, I think it's the IP has to shape that, and you have to get a good sense. We're an industry that's built on comps, or like comparisons of pre-existing IPs. Any business plan or proposal for any
intellectual properties.
Intellectual properties. Yes.
So you look at whenever someone is presenting a business case for a property, for whether it's a film, you have comparisons of like, well, these are how films that are similar have performed in the past. They had these similar elements. Maybe it was also a sci-fi thriller. Maybe it also featured, someone that's similar to our main character. And, you look at the comparisons, and then you say, well, so we can estimate that we can get, we can recoup X amount and, generate this amount of revenue.
Yeah. And so let's take it down to sort of a basic intellectual property, right? So, for instance, you write a book, right? That book is your intellectual property. But then I decide I want to make a movie about it, right? Well, before I make that movie, I need a script. That script then becomes your intellectual property, but it's a subsidiary of the book. Well, then when I make the movie, that's a completely different property, intellectual property, from the script. So now there's 3 intellectual properties tied to that one. and the same thing with the immersive element, right? When I create a VR experience based on the movie, that's a separate intellectual property. So all along the way, you're trying to find opportunities with that one intellectual property to create some sort of economic model.
And yeah, and you have to, it's challenging because we've got to be really strategic, because it's really hard to make serious money in VR when there's not the mass adoption of
Right.
headsets, you know.
When do you think that mass adoption is coming?
Ooh,
I find it so fascinating.
I don't
So
know
many
if I want to
people
go on the record.
It's right around the corner, but
Yeah.
I feel like
Well,
I just feel like it's a little bit longer than that, than right around the corner. Thoughts?
Well, my thought is that I have a bit of a different perspective on it, is because I think that the direction that the market is going into, that it's all linked together. And so you think of the difference between a good diamond and a bad diamond, right? So what we're trying to do is create good diamonds. So the more we have to engage the audience in experiencing the content, that diamond is more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost kind of like chicken and the egg. You know, it's like if there's not a lot of content, then maybe people won't be interested. But at the same
Right.
time, if vice versa isn't true, then they won't have anything to watch.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And you look at the Disney model, right? Disney will make a movie, and then they'll have toys, and then they'll have games, and then they'll have the ride, right?
it's in the merchandising.
It's in the merchandising. So that intellectual property has more value because it has more avenues to access it. And so, you know, that's how I look at, you know, sort of an economic model, especially in a digital environment. It's because, you know, the narrative that movies are a bit of a dying breed, I think is a false narrative, because I just think that we have to be smarter about how we use the tools available to create the content and engage the audience in an experience.
I want y'all's idea on y'all. God, see, my text is coming out. I'm sorry. I try not to, but sometimes it just comes out. What is your idea of, on my side of things? My audience is very probably more on the side of independent content creator, right? But there's a lot of people who they're just living their creative life, and they want to get involved on your side of the stuff, but also they want to do their own thing. And I think it's very interesting how I'm seeing YouTubers build teams and becoming their own production houses, you know, going from making videos on their bed in their bedroom to really these powerhouses. But I think a lot of what the community lacks, and why I think we see a lot of people rise and then just disappear, is there's a lack of structure. And that's something that over in LA you guys do very well, right? I mean, you're very used to working with other people, to having everything from finance to creative to post-production just all on lock. And so do you have any ideas on how independent creators can really like utilize this model of like the IP and really thinking about their things? Maybe it's being more structured around the branding of like their content, breaking it up into series more maybe, and being more intentional with pitching it beyond their own channels. Or it's kind of like, you know, again, there's room to grow in what I'm doing and what independent creators are doing. So I guess the question is, how do you see basically taking what you guys are doing and how we can apply that to what we're doing?
Yeah, and I want to make sure I understand the question.
I know that was everywhere.
Only because I'm a really strong process guy, right? And
well, let me stop you there.
Okay.
That's what all of us lack.
Okay.
And that's what I'm trying to ask is like, how, you know, process. What is process? How do we apply that? How do we hire people? How do we get structure on creative?
And there are models that exist, right? The thing that I want to sort of touch on is the two different models. One is, for our industry, right, it's follow the money. For some industries, the counter to that is it's follow the audience. if you're following the audience, then you find out what the audience is looking for. You create content to get to them. The economic model typically trails that. For us, it's who's buying content and what are they buying, and whose content are they buying, and how did they sell it to them. So our process follows, how do we get to the money, because that's the way we get to do what we want to do. Some models are, how do we find the audience, because you find the audience, you build the audience, and then the money follows you. So it's determining what your model is and the process to get there. That's what I would offer.
That's good. Because I think a lot of people get to a point, and I'm asking this just because it's, the point that I'm at, where it's like, okay, I'm done being hunched over editing videos for 10 hours a day. Like, there's bigger fish to fry at this point. When you found attention and you want to scale, but as a creative, it's almost like my brain doesn't work in that way to like, oh, wait, I have to write out what someone has to do. Why can't they just be another me,
Yeah.
And then you get disappointed a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think I think we need to put more emphasis on process in the creative community. And I think that's what will really help us.
And I would offer that in that instance, that what you're working to do is merge the models, whereas you've built an audience and now you want an economic version of that. And so it's finding out how to use that asset and what entities are paying for it, right? What entities are financing it and putting resources behind the audience now that you have it. I just want to offer that, one really good example of that is Netflix, right? Netflix has built an audience, right? Now they need content. So if you notice how they're spending a lot on content because they built the audience first, whereas the studios have libraries of content because they built the content and now they have to find the audience. So it's finding where your assets are and who's interested in them and what strategic partner can you find. Once you identify that, you look at similar models to say, how did they get there? And then that's your process.
So good. Amen. Yes. Last couple questions. I kind of want to talk a little bit about specific projects that you guys have going on at JuVee. And so let's just start with you, Josh. What is a exciting, VR or maybe the project you were talking about earlier? You can kind of like put a book into it on like how it went, or is it ongoing?
It's still in post.
Okay.
I can't say much more than that,
all right,
unfortunately.
All right.
But yeah, we've got a lot of really exciting stuff. We've got augmented reality storybooks. We have a lot of virtual reality games, things that would be like narrative-driven experiences for like VR arcades, but also at-home stuff. And then we have traditional video games that are like console, PC, and then iOS that are in development. We have branching narrative experiences, kind of like the Bandersnatch on Netflix, where you kind of like a choose your own adventure thing. Yeah.
A little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. We launched the Spheres Songs of Infinity with the Spheres team. And that was with Kaleidoscope and Atlas V at the Seattle Mopop Holodome, which we're really excited about. And yeah, so that's...
And something that I like that you touched on the panel we did, and one of the great things that you guys do is you bring diverse stories to the forefront. And something that I found really interesting that I never thought of was when you're making video games and the tools that you are given, like a lot of times, it's like, oh, it only knows how to like reflect life off of like a white person's skin or something. And how diversity is so important throughout like every layer of my mind wouldn't even have gone to video games like that.
Yeah.
And so can you actually I'm like, can you say exactly what you said at the panel?
I can't remember.
But it was so interesting. Like, I guess, what are some of the challenges that you faced in the VR or video game specific industry with that? Because, I think it's so important that you're telling a wide variety of stories. And even with video games. I think recently Overwatch just introduced a Haitian character, and one of my friends who was Haitian was like so stoked. He was like tweeting out, he's like, guys, it's me. This is so cool.
That's so cool.
And so it matters, right? It really does. And so, but what are some of those challenges that you face with the technicalities of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, inclusivity is our reality just as a company. It's not, we're looking to make inclusive and diverse content, but it's very organic in the way that it happens. It's just the stories that really excite and move us. But it's also just good business. We're looking at an underserved market, especially in the immersive and interactive space. You're looking at, you have more of a budget for artists and for developers and for creators on the AAA game level, the really big budget studio level character design and development, but not so much on the indie level. It's really hard. If someone wants to create an inclusive or a diverse game with diverse or inclusive characters, it's a challenge. If you're just going and buying characters that are fully rigged on the asset store, it's really hard. And a big part of that are some of the, like we were talking about on that panel, is even the way that shaders are put on characters to react to light. There's a long-standing history of assets that that shader was not designed, based off of the skin of someone with more melanin, and it's a challenge.
Which is so short-sighted, though.
I know, yeah. And it's hard to find like clothes for the female characters for some reason too. It seems like,
totally.
Yeah.
And I look forward to the time where diversity inclusion is not a thing,
right?
Where we're just identifying opportunities and looking at markets that are underserved and serving them, right? Because I heard someone at breakfast the other day, they mentioned marginalized communities, right? And I'm like, marginalized. There's billions of dollars being spent over there. If you don't recognize that as an opportunity, then you're a bad business person,
right?
Yeah. So it's the world. Like Josh was saying, it's an organic process. The world has all of us in it. And so we should all have content that we can relate to.
Right.
And that's kind of the key. And not everyone's going to relate to every content, but that's not the objective. The objective is to find an audience that relates, right? And the one thing we know for sure is that we all love, hopefully. We all laugh. Hopefully. You find those things that we have in common, and that's what the content should reflect, but it also should be reflective of the world around us.
Yeah, I love that. I always say I look forward to the time when I'm not just asked to be on panels that are women in tech panels, but when I'm just a woman on a tech panel,
right?
And it's that's when I look at, because I know with these things you have to be intentional, right? There are reasons why there's certain initiatives, why there are specific companies catered to things, because there is still work to be done, but at the same time, it is good business
it's good business.
I mean, especially when you're talking about appealing to women, it's like, guys, we're 50% of the population,
right.
So it's good business.
It's good business.
Good business. It's the fastest growing market in video games.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
young women.
I'm baffled by that. And I think, you mentioned how your experience kind of determines, how you got where you are today. And I had a really interesting job when I was doing some work for Disney, in that the job was I was a production consultant to the immigration department.
Wow.
Right?
What did that entail?
Well, it entailed monitoring all of the hires for production to determine if everyone was properly documented. And so I had to go through maybe 1,000 documents a day. What I certainly realized is that I didn't care what the people looked like. I didn't care what they wore, what was their address. I just cared if they were American. Right. Because that's all that mattered, right? And we had to do this government training periodically, and it was like, this is all we care about. If this is not marked, then we have to stop everything and figure out why. And I was like, okay, so the government doesn't care. The studio doesn't care. So it's a total social construct. right? Because when you walk on the set, you see all kinds of people, but no one's really looking at the fact that from all kinds of people from all different backgrounds. But no one stopped to think all the company cares about and all the government thinks about is what did you mark on that form?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And suddenly it wipes away all that sort of social construct. So if we could just take a deep breath and say, okay, let's connect on a different level and see each other and realize that the differences are actually our assets. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we'd all be born the same.
Yeah.
Right?
And that wouldn't be fun.
It would defeat the purpose.
Yeah.
So every individual is born as an individual because that's our assets.
Yeah. And that's, why your story is unique. That's why where you come from, where you're raised. I mean, that is your asset because that's your story and no life is the same.
Exactly. And it's not a liability, it's an asset. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that drives us is finding those assets and sharing them with audiences so that we can
love that.
Advance the conversation.
Oh, love that so much.
It's just better. I think when we're going through conversations about a story, I love that this company is made up with people with such diverse backgrounds because we get to fill in gaps that would otherwise not be addressed if you don't have these different perspectives at the table. Mm-hmm. And I love the story of your Haitian friend, seeing, being able to identify.
He's actually a massive YouTuber, like a tech YouTuber. And he just had this whole Twitter thread today and it was so cool for everyone to be like, yeah.
I remember seeing
your average consumer, guys. I'm talking about Judner, if you're curious. Yeah.
I remember seeing The Prince of Egypt as a kid with my family, and to have everyone celebrating your culture to be able to identify with the story is so cool. Mm-hmm. It's you can't really describe that to be able to have that feeling of being seen.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. And I'm obsessed with that soundtrack. I'm such a hardcore fan, and I'm convinced if we continue.
Everyone loves that.
Okay, good.
It's not unique to you. That's a great.
It's a great movie,
but that's good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It's good storytelling. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that can connect with anyone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's. I think there's so many benefits to cultural specificity in the stories, and it's exciting to be able to get up every morning and to work on telling these stories that inspire us.
Love that. Absolutely. Heck yeah, guys. Well, Rob, Josh, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
I'll
thank you so much.
Some of your projects, links in the show notes below, guys. If you are curious, make sure to come back every single Monday for a new episode of That Creative Life. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. And until next time, guys, keep creating, stay peachy. Thank you, guys.
Yay, Creative Life.
Woo!